Well, welcome to Christian Answers. This is Pastor Jeff Short. Glad to have you along for our discussion today. Today, we're going to be talking about something that Christians have been arguing against our culture for many, many decades, and that is this whole idea of this Playboy culture, Hugh Hefner, Playboy magazine, all that kind of stuff. And we have been talking about that and arguing with our culture, and they have been saying, "Oh, you're just a bunch of prudes. You're just a bunch of Puritans who are afraid of sex, and there's nothing wrong with this." The Playboy culture, pornography, that whole area, the culture has been telling Christians, "You're an alarmist. You're trying to scare people. You're arguing a slippery slope. If we go this far, then it'll go this far, this far." And we have been trying to tell people that the Bible teaches Christian morality. It teaches sex between men and women only within marriage, that premarital sex is wrong and sinful. This so-called Playboy lifestyle, this singles lifestyle where dating leads to sex, and this adultery lifestyle where couples can swap their wives and husbands around, and all kinds of different configurations of deviant sexual behavior. We've been saying that's wrong, that's evil, that's sinful, and our culture's been laughing at us. They've been telling us, no, 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 again, you're just a bunch of Puritans, you're prudes, you're old-fashioned. And today we have an article now on the Playboy leader Hugh Hefner. He's dead now, long gone, but some of the reports are now coming out that he has some of the most perverted and twisted sexual practices and philosophies. And we were saying that to people, and they were not listening. They were dismissing. So let's get into this article that is now put out by Yahoo Entertainment. And I just want to read some of this information here. They're showing Hugh Hefner there with one of his girls. He basically had a harem. In the 20th century, in the modern culture, modern America, this man was allowed to have basically, essentially, a harem of women surrounding him. And he was involved in all kinds of immorality, and his poison has been spread all over this country and all over the world. And Christians and ministers, I remember the late Reverend Jerry Falwell was battling against this pornography invasion that now had come into our country from all over, basically came from Europe and started in those European countries and now had come over into the United States. And Hugh Hefner was part of that whole pornography wave. And he basically mainstreamed pornography for men, basically mainstream pornographic material for men. And the culture, the popular culture, basically the movers and shapers in society were telling Christians, "Oh, be quiet. You're just old-fashioned, and you're prudish, and you're out of touch with the times. We have now birth control, and there's abortion now, and we can deal with unwanted pregnancies, and there's nothing wrong with expressing your sexual desires." And it was the 60s revolution that started this whole cultural upheaval. Because before the 60s, you have to remember, before the 60s, the basic attitude was that you didn't do this stuff except you were not part of that. You were not part of that immorality. That there were some people that were always doing immoral things, but the mainstream consensus was Christian morality was to be the dominant philosophy, and most people did stick to that. But let's get into this article. and it'll show that we were basically right all along. We were basically right all along, and that Playboy and Hugh Hefner and the whole '60s revolution, as far as the pornographic aspect of it, was a danger and is a danger still continually. And just proving the Bible right, proving Christianity right, proving the whole thing, our faith right. When you get into this, it says Monday's episode of Secrets of Playboy featured many disturbing claims about Hugh Hefner and the depravity. See, these are secular writers, and they're using the word depravity that went on in the Playboy mansion. Did anyone doubt? Did anyone have any doubts that Hugh Hefner was a sexual pervert? He was a sexual deviant, and he was depraved, and so was the whole Playboy mansion. The whole idea that you can bring in all of these young women, and you can bring in men and have parties and sleepovers and all of that. That is telling you right away that there is a lot of sexual depravity going on there, and it's all immoral and it's all wrong. And yet people, they just ignored it. Oh, don't tell us about the rules of God. Don't tell us about the morality of God. We live in a new age. Well, we don't. We live in the same age that everyone has ever lived in on the planet Earth. And that age is God has moral standards, and he expects them to be adhered to. And if we don't, it'll lead to death and destruction. Hefner's ex-girlfriend, Sandra Theodore, emotionally opened up about her 5-year relationship with Playboy founder, declaring him a monster. Of course he's a monster. He's a sexual, immoral person who was given a license to do this stuff by society. And he went to the depths of depravity. The things he got turned on by, nothing was enough. Nothing, the former Playmate revealed. Theodore, who dated Hefner See, again, redefinition of everything. Before, say, the 60s revolution, dating meant that a boy asked a girl out, they went to the movies, they went to a restaurant, they went to a sporting event, and pretty harmless fun. Dating today, since the Hugh Hefner and the 60s revolution, means that they might be living as man and woman together. They might be bearing children together. Dating means totally something different today than it did before. That at first the relationship was like a fairy tale. We were so in love. Again, the word love now has been totally debauched and debased. To say that what was taking place in this Playboy mansion between Hugh Hefner and these Playboy bunnies, these young girls who would come over there, to say that that is love is so preposterous. Again, the words love, we talked about the word dating. She said she dated Hefner. What she was doing was not dating Hefner. She was basically his wife, live-in lover, living in sin. And what she was in was not love as much as it was lust. So the total debauching and debasing of words occurred in the 60s. That's what we see now in Hollywood all the time, and in the rock songs that came out of that too. But her story is similar to those Hefner's other girlfriends who claimed they were groomed and isolated. He cut me off from the world, Theodore recalled. Of course he did, because there was no one to stop him, because people were telling others, especially Christians, that it's none of your business what happens behind private doors. And this whole individualism came into our society, and you were not supposed to ask, you were not supposed to tell what was going on in secret, because that was a person's own private choice. Well, here it is. A lot of the junk is coming out. The model's relationship with Hefner coincided with when he decided to date multiple women at the same time and live the life that Playboy magazine represented. Theodore had to recruit young women for group sex with Hefner. Of course. What do you expect? He led a sexual revolution. This devil, this Satan, led a sexual revolution. He simply picked up on the ideas that were flying around this country and the culture in the world during the 60s, sexual liberation, and he played them out. And in many quarters still in our pop culture, he is hailed as a hero. He is hailed as a liberator of sexual impulses, because before, the Judeo-Christian moral standards were in operation, and that's what people followed. And that was seen as restrictive. That was seen as in bondage. That was seen as repressive. Haven't we heard those words? Repressive, puritanical. Those were used to describe Christian morality, the kind that kept marriages together, the kind that kept teenagers and young people under self-control. Those restraints were lifted, and then you got to see what the real dirty, filthy chaos that it creates. She said, I was told it was a party. It was getting together to have some fun, she tearfully said. That was my way of pretending I really wasn't doing it. They're basically group orgies. That were taking place in the Playboy mansion. Theodore, who previously claimed she was Hefner's drug mule, admitted to doing cocaine in order to go along with what her boyfriend wanted her to do. So here she's living this high life. She's doing what she thinks is the great thing. And now she's regretting it. And she's trying to blame it all on Hefner, which is not fair, because she was a young woman, but she was a woman. She was a young adult, but she was an adult. And yet she's trying to blame Hefner for all of this. She was part of the problem because she bought into that. And that was always part of the problem with this Playboy corruption. These women bought into his philosophy. He tricked them. He recruited them. He conned them. He took advantage of them. He exploited them. Sexual harassment. Talk about sexual harassment. Talk about sexual exploitation. We're talking, nowadays the feminist movement is into the Me Too movement, where if you just make a little remark about a woman at an office, you're canceled, basically. Your career is over, and you can be fired for that. This was taking place, sexual harassment, and people let it go. Perhaps one of the most startling moments of the night came when Theodore allegedly she walked into a room only to find Hefner fondling their dog. He said, dogs have needs, she recalled. I have never let him alone with a dog again. I could not believe what I was seeing. Well, of course. Depravity. Depravity has no boundaries. Once you say you don't have to follow God's laws, once you follow your own impulses, the fallen nature. See, the Bible teaches that in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve lived a perfect life until they fell into sin. They disobeyed God. They ate from the forbidden fruit from the tree at the prompting of the devil. Of course, the devil is always there tempting. But that was the fall. That was the fall of sin. Now, everyone since then has inherited that fallen nature. Everyone since then has been a sinner. And the sinful desires, sinful impulses lead to depravity if they're not checked. And that's what the Judeo-Christian moral standards did. They checked the sinful nature of man for century after century after century. People went to church. They learned what was right and wrong. They read from the Bible. They learned the moral standards, what was expected of them. Single people, you wait to marriage to have sex. And then when you're in the marriage, you only have sex to your wife, if you're a man, or your husband, if you're a woman. That's the moral standards of Christianity. But see, in the 60s, they threw that out. They tossed that out. That's not to say that people hadn't sinned and committed fornication and adultery and all of the other sexual deviations, but it wasn't mainstreamed. But now we have sexual immorality mainstream, and Hugh Hefner is a huge, huge influence in mainstreaming the kind of depravity you might see only, say, for example, in a busy seaport where sailors come and go and prostitutes ply their trades. That was something that had always taken place. It was frowned upon by decent people in decent society and moral Christian society, but it took place nevertheless. Now that kind of activity is mainstreamed, and everyone is seemingly doing it because of monsters like Hugh Hefner. Former Bunny mother P.J. Maston shared a horrific story allegedly involving porn star Lunda Lovelace. Maston said the Deep Throat star was drunk and drugged one night at the Playboy mansion and performed a sexual act with a German Shepherd dog. Theodore corroborated the disturbing tale, claiming Hefner admitted it happened, telling her, "We all watched." Again, are you surprised? Are you really surprised at the depravity that Hugh Hefner had because of the whole philosophy? So you have to look at the philosophy behind this garbage. You have to look at the philosophy that is taking place. And you have to recognize that people act out on what is in their hearts and in what is in their minds. And you didn't have to look at everything Hugh Hefner was doing to know what he was doing. You didn't have to have these whistleblower tell-all reports like this alleged Theodore, this woman who was his girlfriend. You didn't have to give these exposés to know what was going on because the philosophy was dictating what was happening. If you don't believe that God has a right and wrong moral code, or if you believe that there might be a God and he does have right and wrongs, but you don't care, you're a rebel, you're a Satan, you're a devil, you don't want to follow God's will, then these kinds of things will happen all the time. And now we're just hearing about the depths of the depravity of the whole Playboy movement. And pastors and preachers could have said that. They did say that. Jerry Falwell said that. He was warning people, don't get involved. Don't read Playboy magazine. Don't buy that smut. It's called smut. Don't get involved in pornography. Now we have the internet. Now we have pornography at the click of a mouse. Now we have access to all kinds of disturbing and terrible images, even more so than in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s when Hefner was at his peak. We have internet pornography, which is even worse of a problem. And you're wondering why the generations are getting worse and worse and more depraved in their sexual activity. Well, it's because we're throwing off the restraint of God. We're dismissing his laws, and we need to have a revival of return to God and return to the Bible and return to church and return to Christianity, or else we're going to slide into the deep, dark pit of death and despair in this country if we haven't even all reached that point already. Theodore alleged that later in their relationship, Hefner brought men into the bedroom and directed her to have sex with them against her will. Of course, this man was a devil. He was a depraved, sick, twisted, sexual pervert who society propped up and sanctioned because he was part of the 60s sexual revolution. I felt so violated having a man that I did not want to be with forced upon me, she recalled. Her breaking point ultimately came when Hefner allegedly brought up snuff films, which is a video that purportedly shows actual homicide. So depravity went so low, so he's already gone from orgies with women and men. He's gone to bestiality in his depravity with dogs. And now he's bringing in these films, these movies that show people being killed or murdered death is brought into this. This is going to the very depths and depravities of sin. And Hefner was a leader of this sexual revolution. And a lot of the films and movies in Hollywood owe a lot to their content to Hugh Hefner for breaking down the barriers. What kind of man is so far gone that it takes killing somebody to get them excited for that big release? He was opening my eyes to this monster. Really, he was a monster. Of course he's a monster. Anyone with a spiritual and moral discernment would know Hugh Hefner was a monster. He was a demon. He was a devil. Theodore declared, although she got the courage to leave, she said she's affected daily by what transpired during her time at the Playboy Mansion. She can't shake loose those images. You can't unsee something. That's the danger of pornography. You can't unsee something in your mind, because once you've seen it, you've seen it. And that's the danger with it today. Now, pastors and preachers, like I said before, Jerry Falwell probably being the most vocal, he was preaching against this, and he was laughed at. We can't be afraid to be laughed at. We need to tell what's true, what's right, whether they agree with that or not. I lived a life of luxury, yeah, but I paid dearly for it. You sure did. And that's why young people need to stop and think, look, don't break God's laws just to live the good life or what you think is a good life. I will never know how to be a normal person. Yes, that's right. Secrets of a Playboy director Alexandra Dean told Yahoo Entertainment that Theodore was the hardest person to get to participate in the documentary, calling her the main voice of the series. The thing that shocked me the most is the depth of her scarring around what happened to her with Hef, Dean said. It was so profound that what convinced me more than anything else that this was a much darker story than I had initially started to make. Just looking at Sandra, listening to Sandra, you could hear all those traces of trauma. Of course, this is what the sexual revolution does. It opens the floodgates. It opens the Pandora's box, if you want to refer to that story from ancient Greece. Once you open that box, you don't know what's going to come out. And once this woman joined Hugh Hefner at his mansion, she thought she was the greatest thing. This was her break, but it ruined her for her life because she opened that box, that forbidden box. God knows what's best for us. He knows what's best for our lives, and when we ignore him or rebel against him, this is what happens. Dean, who spoke to former playmates, Hefner's ex-girlfriends and mansion staff members, believes the height of his darkness was when he dated Theodore. I think it was the height of his drug use as well. I think it unleashed things, or at least it eradicated certain boundaries that might have been otherwise. The real Hef came roaring out. It's dark. Yes, when you remove the boundaries of God in your own personal life or in the life of society, this is what happens. And it doesn't happen just to Hefner. It doesn't happen just in a Playboy mansion. It happens to our entire society, and it's happening right now. Dean added, when we think about the mansion, it's kind of like Vegas. We think it's fun and cute, that anything that happens in the mansion stays in the mansion. But when you look at what really is taking place, it's this voracious sex addict who had to keep experimenting and pushing the boundaries of experimentation. There's nothing fun and cute about it. It's brutal. It's terrifying. And there's more than a little bit misogyny embedded in there. Playboy issued a statement ahead of A&E series premiering last month. So, yeah, Playboy's going to deny it, but they are part of it. The Hefner family is no longer associated with Playboy, and today's Playboy is not Hugh Hefner's Playboy. We trust and validate these women and their stories, and we strongly support those individuals who have come forward to share their experience, a spokesman told Yahoo. As a brand with sex positivity at its core, we believe safety, security, and accountability are paramount. No, you cannot then go back, if you're a pornographer, which Playboy is, You can't then go back and say, well, we distance ourselves from all of that. No, that is part of what you are. Pornography leads to this. And they talk about sex positivity. Pornography exploits women. See, there's a contradiction in their philosophy. They want to have the sex part. They want to break God's laws. They want to break the rules. They want to violate the Bible's commands against all kinds of these ugly sexual practices. And yet, they say, well, we distance ourselves from Hugh Hefner and the Playboy Mansion and all of that. No, you can't do that. Because, again, it's a Pandora's box. You open the door for these experiences, and you will be shocked and you will be horrified what comes out. So Playboy can put all the disclaimers it wants, but it was part and is part of the problem. And Hugh Hefner was just one of the many influences in our society during the 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s that really turned the tide in our culture and basically made us a corrupt culture. He really destroyed a lot of lives in this country because of his influence, his effect on society. And people and authorities and leaders, political leaders, economic leaders, allowed this to take place because it was good for business, or it fit the times, or it did all kinds of this stuff. But the problem was, once you get the genie out of the bottle, you can't put it back. And you start walking down the road of sexual immorality, you start violating the commands of God, you start attacking Christianity and calling it repressive and puritanical, old-fashioned, making fun of it, laughing at it, and you break down all of the moral bounds and the fences. You know, Chesterton was right when he said, when you come upon a fence in a field and you're walking along, don't tear that fence down until you find out what it's there for. But the progressives, the liberals, the so-called enlightened secular humanists, they said, oh, we don't need any of those moral fences. We don't need any of those moral boundaries. Let's all tear them down. Those are the church, tear the church's values down, tear Christianity's values down, tear the Bible's values down, get rid of all of that. We're adults. We can make our own decisions. Well, what happens is you open up a Pandora's box, and then what comes out, you're not going to be happy with. So we have this article that really underscores exactly what Christians have been saying for 2,000 years. We need God. We need His law. We need His will to show us the way and to hold our society together and hold our lives together. God's way is always the best way. Well, I hope that's been a helpful commentary. We'll see you back next week. God bless.